me that you'll be true. Lies, lies, that's all I ever get from you. Cheers, cheers, I shed a million tears for you. Cheers, cheers, and now you're loving someone new.
It's documentary or a mockumentary or a folkumentary. Whichever kind of film it is, it's Welles' look at the border between art and truth through using like old footage, reenactments, and through both movie magic and stage magic, from which he harkened back to his earliest moments. We look at the reality, the real purpose, and the real value behind fakery of all kinds.
Wells is having so much fun here. You rightly called back his love of magic, and you do see him do some magic tricks. But even when he's not doing magic tricks, he is got this smile that just says, watch what I'm about to do. I'm going to show you something you haven't seen before.
Yes. It almost may rival Chimes at maybe a film that kind of gets a bit of what really drives Welles. What does really Welles want to do by showing films for people, you know? He wants to go and like entertain you. He wants to thrill you. He also wants to fool you in a way of messing with people, but in a whimsical way. And in a way that maybe illuminates so that you pick up on something you didn't even know you had, you know? Mm-hmm. This feeling of charitable fakery, you know, about saying, hey, isn't this cool? Isn't this wonderful or interesting how I just deceived you? And that sensibility is just reflected through this look at art. And in one way you can call this film is artception, where the deception of the art world is shown at this level, then another level, and yet another level still. So it can put you in a really interesting place where you go, I don't know how I'm supposed to look at this, what I'm watching.
And one of the most interesting levels here is him questioning the entire notion of authorship and whether it's important or not. And there's such a powerful scene where he talks about this church that is a beautiful, gorgeous piece of architecture, and he describes it in poetic terms and makes the point of nobody signed their name to this church. We don't know who built it, where the ideas came from, how it came to be. We just know it's here. And it makes our time on earth better to have this piece. And it's no less because we don't know who created it.
Mm-hmm. Contrasting, though, is this Falstaffian level of exuberance of people who claim ownership. Mm-hmm. This art guy who has, by faithfully duplicating works of classic artists, has managed to put out what looks to be just a wonderful existence on the small island of Ibiza.
A fellow named Elmir de Hore.
Mm-hmm. What an interesting last name, by the way, right? And he's having a grand old time visiting the cafes in town, hosting these swank parties where all these people are attending. And he got this through doing these duplications, to which he claims that his work is in all the great galleries. Mm-hmm. Elmir, while no Falstaff by any means, is still a very fun presence, and the attitude he has towards the kind of paintings that he's done is an interesting embrace of compromise, let's just say. Welles and his editor, Marie-Sophie Dubout, really do a masterful job of highlighting these contradictions just through this really wonderfully exuberant use on editing. because you go and look through like still photographs of famous artists, through footage that Elmire has been through earlier TV broadcasts, current footage that Welles has done, footage of Welles in editing console, watching this stuff, and it's constantly shifting this perspective in a really great, energetic way, and doing these really cool, insightful moments through just the juxtaposition of editing. Like there's a real fun moment where someone who looks like he's interrogating Elmire, but it's footage from two totally different things, but they're contrasted with each other to make it look like these two people are having an uncomfortable moment, whereas those two bits of footage could have been like done years apart.
You know, for a guy who's famous for long shots, there's an almost MTV like music video quickness in the editing here. And again, you know, at this last stage of Wells's career, he's still innovating. He's still working in styles that he hasn't worked in before.
Definitely. And he's like has the energy level in terms of these cuttings of a person a third of his age. It just moves so fluidly from one subject to another, from one perspective to another, from making it like feel like you are there in this moment to making you incredibly aware that you're watching someone in this moment that wasn't maybe necessarily even true in the first place. And just when you think that you're looking over at Elmire and his story, the movie goes to some completely unexpected tangent. One involving an author with unclear motives of his own, and involving, of all people, Howard Hughes. Think about that as ironic, how ironic that his ending film is also about a titan of industry that remains fundamentally an enigma. And also, like with the Arcaden thing, ends up being missing and disappearing from the scene. And when you're thinking about that, then the movie shifts in yet another direction.
And this direction includes a look at some of his own past history and what was possibly his most famous bit of fakery, the old War of the Worlds broadcast from the late 30s. And we discuss it in part one of the episode, but Welles goes through here again how the broadcast led to widespread panic and people thinking there was an actual Martian invasion.
Mm-hmm. He has this appreciation of all the multiple layers. So many scenes in F for Fake shows him talking to people about filming the movie, showing the camera crew filming the movie, and showing Welles himself, both in old footage doing these War of the Worlds, and Welles himself performing magic tricks. Harkening back to his own early boyhood history, it's so much about Welles, but so much about Welles faking things. You know? It's a real great like kaleidoscope / Lady From Shanghai level funhouse mirror about a guy and his own approach to his own work, right?
For sure. And he's got one more part to this as well, which is a young woman who is telling this story about how Picasso would paint pictures of her, and then her grandfather would sell it without his permission.
And that was really great because it's that lady is shown walking around in the very beginning of this movie. And so what you think is just an attempt to distract or make some sort of point about a point about like people's attention.
Right, because all the men are just staring at her intently. She's a beautiful woman.
Exactly, which I believe Welles even said was an abandoned project from him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so what you think was just something of an aside turns out to be some critical part of the story that he's trying to say. Once again, like the movie gets you to think of what you see about it and recontextualize and look at things in yet another viewpoint.
But the magician may have one more trick up his sleeve.
Yes. I want to just say that the film's way that it enchants and gets you to like think on things is very much best appreciated by taking a look what it's doing with as little detail as you can. The things we mentioned on this do not even begin to scratch the surface of the different kinds of pleasures and surprises that F for Fake manages to do. But that being said, now we're going to bring in on this last trick that Brad was talking about, because Welles does a statement in the beginning where he says, "Ladies and gentlemen, for the next hour, I'm going to give you nothing but the facts." And then while you're watching and seeing all these wacky characters and very fascinating juxtapositions, you kind of are put in like almost an anti-magician spot where you just go, is this really the truth? Is this guy honoring his promise? As Welles relates on the Picasso story, Welles makes his own appearance and says, "Remember my promise? I promised you the facts for an hour, but that passed 20 minutes ago. And now I just made that whole stuff up." It's just a great rug pull moment.
And as it turns out, the woman who Picasso was allegedly painting was played by Oja Kadar, who was Orson Welles' girlfriend to the end of his life and is still one of the people that manages his estate. So her presence in the movie is yet another level of the fakery. So I have two thoughts on this. The first is that it's incredibly cheesy. And
yes,
the second is that that's okay, because Welles takes such delight in those lines and introducing this last bit of fakery within the film itself, that even though it's like the equivalent of a hokey old vaudeville joke, the very fact that he seems to love it so much sells it for me.
That's right. He gives you this feeling that there's a kind of magic in the audacity of how you try something that is able to fool people and enchant people, but at its heart is very, very silly. You look back at his career and it has these kind of reflections. Just look back from his first image of the reflections of a snow globe as a nurse approaches in Kane, to just all the crazy stuff that happens in Shanghai and Mr. Arkadin, to just the kind of absurdity of a man behaving the way Falstaff does in Chimes at Midnight. And I think this is something that he's been always exploring. Just, wow, what a crazy thing that movies can do to get us to believe and wish and feel things through just basically playing around on a big play set, you know? Maybe in a sense, the fact that we can believe and feel and be drawn in on these worlds of such cheesiness, maybe the rightest word for the thing is magic.
It's a word Orson Welles would appreciate.